Hey there, Film Buds. Welcome back to the Film Buds podcast. I am your host, Paul,
And I'm Lauren.
and we are joined once again by the one, the only, the irreplaceable Henry. Henry, how are you?
I'm well, Paul. Thanks for having me back on. Yeah, it's going well. Had a pretty quiet Christmas, but it was nice though. And I guess for anyone who doesn't know, I'm just on leave from the Air Force right now, and I'm heading back in a few days. But wanted to see how much Film Buds time I could get on while I'm here. So yeah, thanks for having me on, and it's nice to see y'all again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. No thanks necessary. I mean, it's your show, however long you're away, it'll always be, something that you brought us. So no thanks necessary. It's your show. You always can come on whenever you like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But how's y'all's holiday?
It was good. We ran 4 miles on Christmas. I'd say that was a Christmas miracle indeed.
Nice.
Yeah, nice and quiet, got some clothes. I got a really kickin' Vice Press Halloween poster for the 1978 film by an artist named Matt Ferguson. My sister got me that, and it was a poster that I had been eyeing for some time. But it was one of those things that I didn't think that I would get it. It was an exclusive, and time and money and things like that being what they are, I just didn't think that it was going to happen. So when I got it, I was pretty pumped about it. So it was pretty good.
Where'd you get it from?
I think it's Vice Press. They're almost kind of like a British Mondo.
Gotcha.
And so yeah, my sister Madeline, who's been on the show a few times, was kind enough to get it for me.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. Did you get anything of note? Santa bring you a new set of fatigues?
Sadly, no. That was off the list, unfortunately. I got some shoes. I was kind enough to get some Lucky Charms, a box of Lucky Charms from someone that was really sweet. Because I've kind of been picking out since I've been home. We were told to gain weight, a little bit of weight while we're here, and so I've been trying to increase my unhealthy intake. But other than that,
yeah, before you cut.
Yeah, exactly. So other than that, not too much. It was just a nice time with family, and that was all that I really needed, this year. So yeah.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great episode. It's our 201st episode. We finally crossed the 200 line.
Yep.
And it's also our last episode of 2021. And so we're closing out the 2021 year and our holiday season today with Gremlins and Gremlins 2, The New Batch. But before we get too deep along into the woods on how we feel about both of those vintage films, we actually, as promised from last week, have, as a fun way to also close out our month, a little Christmas history lesson brought to you by Lauren. Normally you have to listen to me babble, but today you're going to get to hear Lauren tell y'all a little bit about the history of Christmas. Dear, you ready?
I mean, yeah, I guess. Can't stall anymore.
Well, then whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away, dear. Gather round, children, and listen to Lauren tell you about Christmas.
All right. History of Christmas brought to you by my readings of A Christmas Cornucopia from by Mark Forsyth. Okay, lovely. Mark Forsyth. I got this book. My mother-in-law got me this lovely book at the beginning of the month, and it says the hidden stories behind our Yuletide traditions. And I haven't finished it yet, but I've gotten past Santa's biography, and I feel like that's a good amount of information.
Yeah.
So I only have 2 more chapters left. It's Christmas dinner and Boxing Day. I'm excited to read about Boxing Day because I literally
Nice.
don't know why people celebrate it or what it is. So
Yep.
exciting. But without further ado, here we go. So it all kind of starts out with, like what Christmas, like we celebrate it as the birth of Jesus. So let's start there. When was Jesus born? So early Christians didn't really know when he was born, but they did know when he died, which was around Passover Friday of year unknown, I guess year 0, I'm not sure. But they really didn't celebrate birthdays back in the day, so they just assumed that when you died, that was your birthday because, great people like to end out their life in a nice round number. So
That's fair enough.
they were like, all right, it was Passover. Passover's in the spring, so his birthday must also be in the spring. So the original Christmas was in late March, early April, around the spring equinox, which is about they said the 28th of March was like their Christmas day, their celebration. And then, so that was around 200 AD is the first documented tellings of this by some crackpot back in the day who was like, I'm going to figure out how to figure out when this lands on the calendar by using quote unquote math and a lot of hopes and dreams, basically. Nobody can really second guess this guy's math because it doesn't make any sense. So then 150 years after that, they were like, that doesn't sound too right. So they were like, we know that Jesus was conceived of sorts. So in theory, he should have a gestation period, in the womb time. So they were like, hey, let's bump it up 9 months from his original birthday and make that his gestation period of sorts. And so they were like, what's 9 months after spring? Winter. So they were like, all right, let's move his birthday to the winter solstice, which is actually this year it was the 21st of December, but no, they don't care. They were like, let's do it on the 25th of December. That sounds really nice. There's a lot of people who are celebrating stuff around that time. Let's kick those celebrations out the way because Christianity rules.
Yeah.
And so that's where we get the day from. But we also have all of these other things that we do during Christmas time that they didn't do back in the day. Where do we get the Christmas tree from? Why do we have Advent calendars, etc., and Santa? So fast forward a few hundred years to the medieval era, and medieval people loved themselves some stories about the Bible. They loved Adam and Eve, and they loved the Virgin Mary, because how can you have Jesus without the Virgin Mary? So they created these plays called paradise plays, where because nobody could read, and so they had to get the stories of the Bible told to them through the arts. And so flip my page, excuse me.
No, it's all good.
And so paradise plays were put on, and they had no stage directions other than the fact that A, they couldn't have Adam and Eve be nudists anymore, and B, they needed the tree that, she gets the apple from. And so there were 2 people on stage, and there was a tree that was covered in apples, and they were like, we need the snake. So they would wrap a piece of ribbon up the tree to symbolize the snake that, convinced Eve to forego the paradise and basically go into sin.
Mm-hmm.
And so fast forward now, hundreds of years, the Christmas tree is the only thing that survived because those plays were never written down, but they liked the symbolism of it, and they would do these plays on Christmas Eve. And so that's how we get our dear old Christmas tree from. It's a nice German tradition, which is fun. Honestly,
Yeah.
a lot of our traditions from Christmas come pretty much from like Germany and like that era.
Yeah.
Which is also how we got the Advent calendar, which is basically just a countdown to Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And they had like a bunch of Advent calendars from like the late 1850s and onward, and people would make them handmade, you know, and usually you would either count down to Christmas with candles or you would use chalk to like mark off the days. Well, this man named Gerhard Lang, his dear mother, decided that he was so annoying around Christmas time because he loved the holidays so much that she would make him extra special Advent calendars every year that had like candies and sweets in them. And he loved the idea so much that when he got to be an adult, he literally mass produced them. And the rest is history.
Yeah, there
honestly.
You go.
Now on to my favorite part of the story, dear old Santa Claus. So Santa is based off of a real person. His name is Nicholas. He lived in the 200s AD. He was born in 270 AD in Patara, Turkey. And as the legend goes, he did not like women or drinking or theater. He was a very, very holy man, very close to God. He was also from a pretty wealthy family, but he was the only child. So when his parents died, he had nothing to do with all of his money because he didn't like any of the sins of the world, basically. So he would do what most rich people do when they have too much money, they would give it to the poor. And so he had a poor neighbor who was very modest and very proud. And so he would end up slipping money into his window at night in order to, so that way he wouldn't have to like be like, who did this? You know, can't give it back.
Yeah.
And so he ended up becoming like the patron saint of like giving to people. And there's so many other things that he apparently did in his lifetime. He apparently saved some sailors and some children. And so that's eventually, I guess, how we got down the line to him being like Santa Claus as we know him. He was very, very charitable man, but he died in let's see, 343 AD on December 6th, or so we believe. And so now that is like his patron saint day. But fast forward now to the New World. We are in like the 1700s, you know, after the war for America. Yay, America.
Sure.
And so like the Christmas traditions were now being brought over to the New World. And along came dear old Santa Claus as well, thanks to this man, John Petard, who loved himself the Saint Nicholas. He is the founder of the New York Historical Society, and year after year, he was like, guys, let's make Saint Nicholas the patron saint of New York. And everybody was like, no. And he was like, fine, I'm gonna make him the saint of my historical society that I created. So he had like I guess like a rival of the time named Washington Irving. And he was a little bit of an ass. He thought that John Petard and his like love for the saint was so funny that he would publish like satirical books and like magazines about how ridiculous this all sounded to him. But you know, back in the day, these people didn't realize that it was satirical, and they were like, all of this stuff is great. And so he ended up writing a book called The History of New York, where he would make all of these ludicrous claims about what Santa Claus did. And so he was like, oh, you know, he comes in the night, puts presents in stockings, and oh, he rides in a wagon, and he's gonna come down your chimney. And all of this was a joke to him. He was making fun of all of this stuff, and New York loved it. They were like, this is great. We should add this all in to our belief of what Christmas is, of what Christmas time means, of Santa. And at the end of the day, like, he did the exact opposite of what he was hoping to do, which was like to basically like besmirch this man's name and like, you know, make fun of his beliefs and all of this jazz. And ending up by doing all of this, he actually like cemented it further into people's like lineage. And I just think that it's so funny that all of this stuff, that from most of the things that we really like keep now, just came from like the late 1800s and such.
Yeah.
Like, it's really not that old. Like early Christmas was pretty much just like a festival of drinking and celebration of like the birth of Christ. And that was pretty much it. There was no, you know, nativities, there was no trees, there was no feast of like specific foods. It was just, you know, another time to get drunk, basically. And now we've got all of these things that we like pass down from generation to generation that are very cemented for the holidays to us, that like really a lot of people just kind of made up and then latched onto, and they're like, I like this, I like that, I'm gonna, you know, pick and choose what Christmas means. And now here we are.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, thank you, dear. That was fascinating.
Quite a bit of information.
And honestly, that was like such an overview. I've really enjoyed reading this book. I think that he's really funny. I think that he understands that like all of this sounds as ridiculous as it is. And I've honestly I found it really informative, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who wants to know more about our Yuletide traditions.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Because, you know, I think that sometimes because we're locked in such a, you know, we're locked within like an 80-year lifespan, I think it's sometimes that we forget that history happens over such a long period of time, that something that you experience today, you know, could have easily formed over 100 or more years across multiple continents and multiple people playing with certain ideas and certain concepts, you know, whether it be a religious tradition or any kind of tradition.
No, yeah. I mean, we didn't even get like Christmas cards until pretty much the printing press was made, you know? So like before then they didn't do that. It was like a ridiculous thing that people found very like, only like the rich people could basically participate in this activity. And so it was really interesting. I, again, highly recommend it.
Yeah. And Paul, let's shoot for 90-95 year span, yeah?
Yeah. Well, you know, some of us aren't lucky.
Yeah.
But no, I think that was a good way to sort of end out the sort of Christmas tradition, or the Christmas month, the holiday month that we've been having. And for our last movies of the month, technically one of them is not a Christmas movie, but when else was I going to talk about it?
Yeah.
But I wanted to do something a little bit more out there and a little bit less, you know, absolutely in the spirit. And so I decided to also pick something I'd never seen before. And so I chose Gremlins and Gremlins 2, A New Badge. And so I guess, Henry, if you're ready to go.
I'm ready whenever y'all are.
All right. Well, then we'll jump on into our review of Gremlins. And as always, we have a clip, so take a listen.
What is it? It's your new pet. Number one, you gotta keep him out of bright light. Number two, keep him away from water.
This is incredible.
And probably the most important thing, don't ever feed him after midnight.
So that was Gremlins from 1984.
Yep.
It is directed by Joe Dante, and it stars Zach Galligan, Phoebe Cates, Hoyt Axton, Key Luke, and Corey Feldman, and Dick Miller. And the premise is a young man inadvertently breaks 3 important rules concerning his new pet and unleashes a horde of malevolently mischievous monsters on a small town. And Henry, since you are here with us today, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Sure. So Gremlins, I got to Gremlins kind of late. I saw it, I think, back in college, and I hadn't watched it since then until I just rewatched it recently. And Joe Dante is someone I think just in general I got to kind of late. I think Gremlins was the first thing I saw, but by far my favorite of his is The Burbs with Tom Hanks. I love The Burbs, and this one I had heard a lot about it going into it back in the day, and overall I enjoy it. I don't think it's, again, it's not my favorite Joe Dante movie, and it's not really a movie that. And you said this was what, 84
Yeah.
ish? Okay. Yeah, it's not, when I think of the 80s or my favorite 80s movies, it's not really there. I could see how someone maybe it could be for some people, but for me, it's just a good movie. I think it's has some fun callbacks to like Alien with how the gremlins like explode or all that stuff. I think is really enjoyable, and it's very charming and funny. And like Joe Dante and Tim Burton definitely have a lot in common. Like they both seem to love 50s and 60s pop culture, like American pop culture, and they seem to both enjoy like indulging in like consumerism, but also there's at least a little bit of commentary there as well. And so it's an enjoyable time, but it's not one that I hold close to my heart or anything. What about y'all?
Dear.
So I grew up watching this movie. I always really enjoyed it. I guess I was never of the mindset of like, it is a PG movie, but it could, I guess, be kind of creepy for children, and I never got that. I always just enjoyed the ride. I loved Gizmo. I thought he was, the Furby before Furbies, and way less creepy. No, and like when we were thinking of movies, I always just like throw out Gremlins as it's kind of like a joke. I was like, yeah, Gremlins, it's a Christmas movie. And it's funny because like I never watched it around Christmas movie. This was like one of my Halloween kind of movies growing up because I felt like because of the horror aspect of it, it felt better for me into that. But honestly, on this rewatch, I was like, no, there's Christmas all in this. It's very much it's not just like Christmas as like a decoration. It is happening during a Christmas holiday, and I think that it's a fun like mishmash. Chris Columbus is the writer, and you can see kind of his like weird twisted way of looking at things that is so different from like Harry Potter in a way, but I guess that's also because that's not like his original work. No, I always really enjoyed it. I hadn't seen this movie in a really long time, so it was fun to like brush off the dust a little bit and go back to a simpler time in my life.
Yeah. Paul, what about you?
So my first Joe Dante film actually was Small Soldiers when I was a kid. And I loved the hell out of that movie as a child. I thought it was a little deranged. I thought that the creatures were so cool. I loved the concept. I wanted my toys to come to life, but like, not in the Toy Story fun way, but in this sort of weird manic fever dream kind of way. It had Tommy Lee Jones as this really wicked, general character, Major Chip Hazard, and I thought that the whole thing was super fun. And like I loved it so much that I remember, I think the year that it came out, my parents as my Christmas gift got me like the 12-inch Major Chip Hazard and Archer,
Nice.
Leader of the Gorgons, figures. And I loved those things. I played with them to death. But then I didn't grow up in a Gremlins house, my mom didn't really watch it. My dad apparently had seen it and liked it, but like didn't really talk about it. And I knew like all the pop culture stuff of like, don't get them wet, don't feed them after midnight, that stuff. But I never really actually seen Gremlins. And so when she threw it out for Christmas, I was like, you know what? I've never seen Gremlins. What's a better time to watch Gremlins than now? And I got to tell you, coming to it at 29, I was absolutely surprised by how much I enjoyed it. You know, it's not a perfect movie, and we can talk about maybe some of the ways that it's not ideal. But I think it's such a dementedly weird, fun, funny movie that I was absolutely charmed by the whole thing. Is it maybe necessarily like everyone's idea of a Christmas movie? But it's this wonderful, delightful horror comedy. It came out the same time as Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
And it's credited; those two are credited as being kind of the boom of the horror comedy. And I think that where that sort of stems from is the fact that essentially comedy at its core, especially like slapstick and stuff like that, and some of the physical comedy of Chaplin and Keaton, goes to ludicrous violence with limited consequence. You know, kind of like a Tom and Jerry, right?
Mhm.
At the core, Tom and Jerry's humor is violence without consequence. And I feel that some of the humor of this kind of hits into that same sweet spot.
Yeah.
And so overall, like I was leaning forward the whole time watching it. I had a
Hmm.
great time.
And Paul, in discussing how to categorize this movie, I mean, you can put it right alongside The Green Knight, you know, along with weird Christmas movies.
No, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, if I guess if I had to give this movie any kind of note, I don't know. I mean, I guess technically it's a little bit kitschy and maybe the plot doesn't always hold up, but honestly, like it was just a blast for me. I don't know. What's I'll say this for starters. The positives, the overwhelming positives for me are, first of all, everything is real and everything looks great.
Yeah.
And I think that it's aged really, really well because of that, because there are so many practical effects, because it's really intricate puppet work. I think that overall it's aged better than some of the other things and even its sequel in some ways as well.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of something similar to like early Tim Burton that they kind of share, is that's kind of stop motion or you know, practical effects that really still hold up. And I think the first half of the movie I think is stronger a little bit because it's not only there's not only more humor, but also it's when the Gremlins are kind of evolving into what they're going to be for the rest of the movie, and then it has that midpoint where they are just the Gremlins, and it's enjoyable, but it's you're kind of at a kind of flatlining at that point or leveling out. And so I think the first half of the movie is something I enjoy a little bit more because of that. But yeah, overall, I mean, I don't really have any huge issues with it. I know some people try and put it in the same boat as something like E.T., but I think E.T. definitely has like definitely more heart and a little more, I don't want to say care, but like a little more staying power, whereas Gremlins kind of plays in more of a B movie zone, which is fine. You know, Joe Dante is a genre director for sure. And yeah, so I don't really have many big notes on it. It's just, what about you, Lauren? Anything?
I forgot how gross this movie gets. Watching them like especially the point where like the gremlins then get wet and then just produce more gremlins, and it's like weird when it's, you know, when they're fuzzy and cute when it's still the mogwai, but it definitely starts to get like in that weird icky spot, and I think that it works so well in making them still feel like they're a real living creature. But I can understand how for some people like it would be very squeamish, especially like, you know, when the mom is like battling all of them in the kitchen part where she's like puts one in the microwave and it like explodes and all that, and it's pretty hard to watch, but I think
Yeah,
that's
very alien. Like that's very like the effects are very alien.
mm-hmm. And I think that it's such a rare thing to have it in like a movie that's definitely like centered around like children and like I guess probably like, you know, teenagers and such. No, I think that this movie still holds up really well. I can definitely understand like the script is not the best. It is, of the two, it is definitely better than the second one. But I always just really enjoy all of the weird little gags that they do. Like the woman who's like riding her chair lift down the stairs, with all of her cats, and then they hijack it, and she ends up like shooting all the way up and like shooting out the window. It's one of those movies where you're constantly like, am I supposed to laugh at this, or am I supposed to be scared at this? Like it's constantly on that borderline, which I think that they do really, really well. No, I do really enjoy this movie. I understand why I haven't watched it in a while, but I think that it's still one that I'll probably keep in like, on the shelf, whenever I get that itch again. It's definitely not like a Christmas must for me, but in any way, shape, or form. But I was a pretty like scaredy cat kid, and so like this was like the borderline from this and like actual horror movies. Like this was it for me.
Interesting.
I think touching on your ET comparison, I think that it technically on like a, hold on, let me reverse that. I think on the ET comparison, the movie tries to build it as a sort of magical friend story, right? He's an irresponsible kid. He can't keep care of his dog, which gets him and the dog into trouble. And then he gets this magical pet where he has to follow the rules, and he doesn't follow any of them, Well, he follows, the two of them, or he doesn't follow two of them. I think the issue is that it's never really made concretely clear in his journey that he learns responsibility and that he learns how to manage, himself and become adult and be better at his job. And so I think that he's a little bit of a flat arc character on a certain level. And so I think that they have all of the magical friend components. The friend comes in, it helps him grow, and then the friend has to leave because he's no longer needed. But the movie never, I think, really cements that idea of the transformation of our lead character well enough to really land that same emotional mark. I think where it probably succeeds more as a message, sort of for me, is I think that you can almost read the Gremlins as kind of all of the negative spirit of the holiday, and as him and Gizmo as kind of what it's supposed to be about, right? General goodness, niceness to people, wanting to please people, wanting to be there for people. And so I think it maybe works better as the emotional crux, right? As opposed to him actually going through any sort of transformation.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And also, on a kind of unimportant note, not that it has any impact on the quality of the movie, but the rules that they break, it's not like that hard to follow the rules. Like the rules are pretty simple.
Yeah.
It's like buying a shirt that says dry clean only. Like it's pretty, easy to follow, but I get it. It's a movie.
No,
I'll get over
for sure. But yeah, like he definitely is just kind of he's a little dense, as a character. And I think up front he is almost a little bit not hard to root for, but you're like, God, you're thick, kid. Like, how does this keep happening?
Yeah.
And so I think he warmed up to me as a character as the movie went.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
This movie has like 3 sections, like as it's structured. It's him with the Mogwai, him doing his best to take care of this little creature. Then there's the transformation, the middle point where it's like, oh gosh, he's gotten wet. Now I've got like 6 of these things, and the other ones aren't quite as good as my other one is, but like they're still not that bad. But like this is kind of like who's causing all of this mischief to happen around the house, because it can't possibly be these things. And then there's the whole point, like after they end up eating after midnight, where all chaos breaks loose and it's really like his job to not only fix his mistake, but also like make sure, clean up as much of the mess as possible. Now this is his responsibility. It's let loose on the town. And now that's like the only time that he really like stands up and is like, all right, I gotta fix my mess. And honestly, that's why he ends up getting his magical creature taken away at the end, because like, the old man comes back and he's like, you're not ready for this. I can tell that you're not ready for this. Look at all this crap that you've made happen. And literally nobody fights it. Even the parents are like, yeah, it's probably for the best. After mom almost like dies, and she was kicking ass. I'm just gonna say that she's the best one, man.
Mom's the surprise MVP.
Yeah.
No, I think that's all really fair. As a fun little historical note, I know that I said that I wouldn't ramble at you, and trust me, I did my research on this movie, and I could give you a lesson, but I won't. As an interesting note, though, this movie got so many complaints, this and Temple of Doom, that this is the reason that PG-13 was created. It was just G, PG, R, and I think X at the time, or maybe it was even just PG. Maybe it was even just G, PG, and X for a while. No, there had to be an R. Anywho, regardless, this movie and Temple of Doom were both rated PG, and parents hated it. They were like, it's way too graphic, it's way too grisly, it's way too horrific for children.
It's like Jaws.
Yeah. And the MPAA, I guess, bitched enough of a blue streak that Steven Spielberg eventually came in front of him, since he had his hand in both of these films, and was like, then make a new rating. And so that's where PG-13 was actually born. But I think it's super interesting that this movie was rated PG, and then we can talk about how the next one was rated PG-13, and whether or not we think there's like a true linkage, sort of, whether or not it should have been versus this one. But we'll talk about that one more in the second one. But yeah, as a little fun fact, this is where PG-13 was born.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a relatively modern invention. I think that and like NC-17 are both like some of the more modern ratings of the ratings board, which is a nebulous and strange organization.
Yeah.
And we watched the like behind the scenes, the making of the movie, and honestly, these are some pretty for their times, like technical marvels of creatures. Because I just assumed, that they were like the Muppets movie, the hand in a creature and it's making all this stuff happen, and that's why you don't really see their feet that often. It's because you can't have feet when you've got an arm stuck up in it. But honestly, these things are like little robots at a certain extent, and it's really just so cool. But on a technical level as well, because like for Gizmo, they had like wires that came out of him, and so like the main kid had to have like wires shoved all through his suit all the way down to his feet, where there were like a few technical people with like joysticks and stuff to like make Gizmo emote and look around. And he was like, yeah, I couldn't really look around or like move too much without basically being tethered to like 6 other people. And it's just for them to make that movie magic happen in such like an effective way. I never once thought that these creatures weren't real. And I think that, that could be, I feel like we should go back, a little bit to that instead of relying so heavily on, well, we'll just do it in post. All of it is right there in the camera. And I just think that that's so cool.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And like they also did some clever stuff with making like an overlarge Gizmo for the close-up so he could articulate more and do more in the face. But then they had to go and create oversized props and things. So whenever you're looking at like Gizmo in the backpack with all of that stuff around him, they had to go in and make scaled up books or scaled up pillows or whatever it is that is his background, to make this like now 3 to 4 foot tall Gizmo that they made seem the correct scale. It's really clever, smart filmmaking. And also as a little added note, I forgot these people from the cast. Gizmo is voiced by Howie Mandel of America's Got Talent and Deal or No Deal fame. But most of the other Gremlin voices, and in particular Stripe, are voiced by none other than Frank Welker, Scooby-Doo and Megatron himself.
Ah, didn't know that.
Yeah, a little fun fact for y'all.
Yeah.
So Henry, if you
Mhm.
had to rate Gremlins, what would you rate it?
Heavy 4, Paul. Heavy 4 for me.
I think that's fair. I think I'd give it a 4 as well. Dear, how about you?
No, that's what I was thinking as well. Honestly, like this is not a perfect movie, and I totally understand that. But like, it's a gem. You know,
Yeah.
it's got a little sweet spot in my heart.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll move on now to a definitely not a Christmas movie. But again, when else was I going to talk about it? Like, how else am I supposed to tag Gremlins 2 into an episode?
Paul, you had to.
So even if we don't talk about it for terribly long, without any further ado, here is a clip for Gremlins 2, The New Batch. And as always, we have a clip, so take a listen.
Remember the last time? We told you not to feed them after midnight. We told you to keep them away from the light. And the most important warning of all, we told you to never, ever get them wet. You didn't listen.
So that was Gremlins 2, The New Batch. It came out in 1990. It's directed by Joe Dante, with all of its animated sections being directed by Chuck Jones. And it stars Zach Galligan, Phoebe Cates, Howie Mandel, Tony Randall, John Glover, Robert Prosky, Robert Picardo, Dick Miller, Gede Watanabe, and one Mr. Christopher Lee. And the premise is the Gremlins are back, and this time they've taken control of a New York City media mogul's high-tech skyscraper. Dear, do you want to start us on?
Sure. Wow, this movie lost all of the charm and was like, what if the Gremlins were the whole thing? They were like, it's just a whole bunch of like Muppets-esque bits of them, you know, doing New York things and WB stuff. And I was like, wow, this is just the worst kind of sequel.
Henry, what did you think?
Oh, well, I guess I'm kind of in agreement, but also kind of not. This was actually a first time watch for me. And so I not to take over your position, Paul, but I know that they'd asked Joe Dante to do a sequel, but he didn't want to. And then they let him basically have full creative control, and he, came back and was, able to do it the way he wanted to. And I think that in a way, I guess, again, similar to Tim Burton, like that can really help a movie, but usually it doesn't. And I think in this movie, it's such a weird sequel. It's all over the place. There's very little plot. It's just a lot of gags and all of that. But I think overall, I actually enjoy it about as much as the first one, but in its own way for different reasons. And so I enjoyed the absurdity of it. And I think the special effects and the designs are probably the best of all of his movies for me. So all of that I really enjoy, but then it's just sometimes things fall flat, or the storyline, you're like, Jesus, there's like nothing here. And so overall, I do think it's still pretty solid, but again, it's not one like I enjoy the experience of watching it, but when I'm done with it, I'm not really thinking about it very much. What about y'all?
No, yeah. So first off, was this a first time watch for everyone?
Yeah, I honestly, I had thought I had watched this movie before, but we started it and I was like, I don't remember any of this.
Okay, so yeah, this was a first time watch for me, and we did Gremlins and Gremlins 2 in the same day. We watched one, waited a few hours, and then started the second one.
Okay.
Honestly, even as we're recording this, I still don't necessarily know 100% how I feel about it. I think, I think kind of like Henry said, there are great moments in the movie, really funny gags, really funny bits, and bits where it is, a true what Joe Dante wanted, which was to satirize the first one. And I think that there are times where it hits that perfectly. And then suddenly I go, wait a minute, that's not where we left that character. How the hell did they get here? And the movie has no interest in telling me. And I go, what in the fuck is this thing? And I get kind of pulled back out of it. And there are gags and characters that I think they put in and then don't use as effectively as they could. And so ultimately, even though I think I kind of like it, I don't know if I like it as well as the first one. And I think honestly, I think it really only gets good kind of once they throw everything out of the window and it just becomes a theme park ride on a certain level. Because whenever I think it pretends to have a plot is probably where it's at its worst.
Yeah. Christopher Lee is really good though. I like him a lot.
Oh yeah, and honestly, like, let me also specify, I don't think that any of this is necessarily the actor's fault. I think, Galligan and Cates are doing as best as they can to bring that heart and charm back. But I just don't think that the story is there to support them in any kind of way.
No.
I also really enjoy the business mogul. In his like ridiculous antics. I think that I don't know the actor's name.
John Glover.
I think that he does a fantastic job. I think that he really understands the character, and he's just kind of like a lovable idiot. And I think that that's like super strong. I love the whole weird mad scientist level. I think that's just bananas, and I think that that's great. But they also, I know that they only put all that stuff in there so that way they could have the whole and then the gremlins transform into nonsense part of it. And, that's pretty hit or miss for me, because also I don't think that they really do anything other than like one gag per transformation with each of them. And then at the end, it's all just like regular looking gremlins down partying in the lobby until like the final scene. And I was like, man, we could have really had some like fun, whole array of transformed ones at the ends with their different powers and such, in this final sequence. And they were like, nope, one and done for each of them.
Yeah.
Missed opportunities.
Yeah, I get that for sure. In terms of like some of the designs or the characters, I do like the brain gremlin. That's a lot of fun. And yeah, I mean, just like the special effects, again, they're pretty great, and you can feel how, since he did have such creative control, how passionate and how personal it is, and so that really comes out, and so that's a plus for the movie. Other than that, the theater scene is really enjoyable. I like that a lot. And
Hulk Hogan almost steals the whole movie right then.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I mean, in the first movie, there's the scene at the microwave where it explodes, and in this scene, or in this movie, there's the paper shredder, which like even for like an '80s movie, it's pretty shocking. But I guess it works in this movie for the most part. It's kind of grim, and I guess I get that. So yeah, it kind of runs out of steam a bit of the way through, but still, it's so wild and, again, self-indulgent that it is memorable in that way, for better and for worse.
No, I think that's definitely fair. I think, for satire or parody or whatever you're doing, if you're trying to call to attention a sort of joke on previous subject material, I think you need to know what your punchline is for the overall thing. And I think with Joe Dante's take on Gremlins 2, I think his joke was, oh, you thought the last one had too much gremlins? Here you go. And I don't know if that makes the whole experience, to your point, sort of land. Last night we watched The Last Action Hero, which is doing a great send-up of action films and that sort of thing. And so like that sequence where Arnold is driving and every single car blows up. You know, like I thought that was really good, and overall I thought that movie did a better job at, even though it's still an imperfect movie, knowing what it wanted to make fun of and what the ultimate punchline of that movie was. And I think that it's the same sort of thing with like Galaxy Quest. You know,
Yeah.
Galaxy Quest had a very specific sort of overall punchline for the movie, if you will. And I don't think that this had that clarity. I think it just had oh, you know, you thought Gremlins was bad. Wait till you see what I can do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that that's to the detriment of the movie. I agree that I think the character design is great. I actually found it less oogie and less creepy. And I think that that's why I find it all the funnier that this one has a PG-13 rating. Because in many ways, I think that this one was much tamer comparatively. Because also a lot of the gross stuff, like in the finale where all of the gremlins blow up, they're also all covered up in fake electricity.
Yeah.
So it's almost hard to see some of what's happening. And so, you know, they even make some references, you know, into what they're trying to riff on in this movie. And so I think that parts of it are successful and parts of it work, but ultimately I definitely think that it's only memorable, honestly, to your point, in the way that it is just kind of like crazed camp all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Honestly, and also I thought that having some of the main characters from the last one return was a little bit of a mistake. I think that maybe the joke could have worked better if we had people who were removed from the previous one. You know, like having Dick Miller come back, one, just kind of pointless because it removes things that our main characters that are new to the movie can do. I think that it's not really necessary to have Billy come back and all of these people. I think that you could have done a new story where new people find these things and you're making a joke on the last one. I actually think that having the cast return and making it a direct sequel harms the fact that it's supposed to be a joke.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
I mean, honestly, like one of the best like jokes for me was the whole the newsroom group of people that are just like making fun of him being like, you know, oh, you can't get it wet. Oh, but it pupates. Oh, that's only after it eats. Oh, of course. And literally that being butted up with the fact that then they all get attacked. I thought that was hilarious. I was like, oh, this is perfect. You know, you don't believe it until you see it right there, and then after they're just like they're so awestruck by what happened that like they still can't even process it, even though they had, you know, so much warning for it. And I think that, you know, like those things really landed for me as like an actual like laugh out loud funny moment, whereas like there were so many times where I was like, oh, you're doing the Phantom now, oh, that's fun, oh, what a world, you're melting, you know. It was just like great. We had time for this, delightful.
No, absolutely. I think I'll probably eventually rewatch Gremlins 2, the new batch, but I definitely don't think that it's one that I'll return to as frequently. Just because it doesn't have that heart. It comes across as a much colder movie.
Yeah, for sure.
I liked the Key and Peele sketch about it, though. I thought that was really funny. I think if you haven't watched it, I think you should.
I haven't got that.
Oh yeah, there's a great one. It's like 4.5 minutes long. You could search it on YouTube. And I think that it sums up exactly how this movie was made.
Okay.
But no, I don't think that it's a disaster. I think that I've seen worse films, but I think that for me, yeah, it was definitely a come down from that first one.
Fair enough.
Dear, if you had to rate it out of 5.
I'm gonna give this one like a solid 2.5 for all of the bad jokes, but I'm gonna give it some points for all of the visual, interesting design.
Okay, Henry, what about you?
I'll go light 4.
Oh, okay.
Hitting heavy.
Abstain. No, I'm only kidding.
Pass.
I think I'll go with I'll give it a 3. Hulk Hogan, honestly, he really sold that moment for me. It's one of my favorite moments in the movie. And I like a lot of the gags, and I enjoy some of the almost Muppet-like, but for teenagers, humor of it. But it narratively doesn't stick the landing for me. As a random aside, I think Hulk Hogan should have come in and saved the day. You know, like he already broke the fourth wall and he was like, you're not going to take this movie, you know, from the people. And I think that when it looked like the Gremlins were going to win, I think is the moment that the Hulk Hogan should have shown back up, the Hulkster, maybe with other wrestlers. And that it should have turned into wrestlers versus Gremlins in the last moment. I think that would have really brought it home for people.
Oh yeah, honestly,
Yeah.
yes, more Hulk Hogan. We needed it.
As a random little oh my god, I had a whole little trivia bit that I was going to share for you on this movie.
Come on, Paul.
Oh yes, here it is. So in the movie theater, it was the whole like the film starts to glitch out and the movie's interrupted. And for the theatrical release on VHS, they did a similar thing, but they were like, well, we can't have it be in the theater. So for the VHS release of the film, the tape messes up and the shadow puppets happen over like a white noise screen. Mm-hmm. And the person that demands, and it's just in voice only, that the Gremlins fix the movie is John Wayne. But John Wayne was dead at the time. And so they talked to his son Patrick, and his son Patrick suggested a particular voice actor to do a John Wayne voice. Mm-hmm. And so the voice that you hear in it is this person doing his best John Wayne impression, demanding that the Gremlins turn the movie back on. And you can actually go and watch it on like the DVD releases now, because you know there's no good way to really do that on DVD. So now on digital and streaming and disc, they just go to the original theatrical version.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
I'm chock full of fun facts.
Clearly.
So last week we talked about like Christmas films and what makes a good Christmas film. I don't think that we addressed this. Henry, what are your must-watches every year?
You know, I'm going to sound kind of like a hipster. I don't really have, I don't know if that's hipster or not. I don't really have one I have to watch every year. It's honestly different every year. So really it's like this year, I watched Home Alone a couple weeks ago. And I don't know if I've watched many others, to be honest. Like I've just been watching movies. And so unfortunately, not for an interesting discussion, I don't really have many must watches for Christmas. Do y'all?
Okay. Honestly, there are ones that I try to hit every year. The one that I've probably hit the most consistently, the two that I've hit the most consistently for probably 5 or more years running now are The Holiday and White Christmas.
Those are both good ones.
Because your father loves The Holiday.
And White Christmas.
Who doesn't? Holiday rocks.
Maybe because it's embarrassing for her.
It's not her acting that she can't cry. She just can't act. So they had to throw that in the movie.
Dear, what about you?
Well, I used to love watching like The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. I always really loved watching Home Alone. We did end up watching that this year.
And last
year, yeah. I do really like Rise of the Guardians. I know it's not, I guess, necessarily a Christmas movie, but Santa is one of the main characters in it. And I guess it is more of an Easter movie, but Easter, you know.
It's like, it has a very wintry aesthetic, and one of our lead characters is Jack Frost. So I think that because of the presence of both Jack and Santa, it leans a little bit more Christmas feeling.
Mm-hmm. But I've always been kind of, I guess I'm a bit of more of a Scrooge of a person, just because of years and years and years of being in chorus and starting the good old Christmas season in September, learning Christmas music. And so like by the time Christmas gets around, I'm so done with it usually that I'm like, anything that's kind of anti-Christmas is like my bread and butter. So I'll usually do like Nightmare, you know, and all of these array of not quite so Christmas movies that we've done. 'Cause I feel like for me, like the Christmas holiday keeps spreading further and further into the season of fall every year. You know, there are people who start it right after Thanksgiving, but then there are those crazy people who are like, after Halloween, you know, forget Thanksgiving, I want Christmas.
Yeah.
And I can't do it. You know, 2 months of Christmas is too much Christmas for me.
Yeah, I was at Target yesterday and they already had the Valentine's Day section up. I was like, you got to chill out.
Calm down. Goodness gracious. Nobody's buying this right now.
I know.
And who is it for? It's honestly just like a visual reminder for the vast public of the people who still don't know when these days of the year fall on. I remember when I was in retail, people would ask me what day Valentine's Day was. And I was like, it's the same day every year. It's the 14th. You know? So it's just, I have to remind people.
Yeah.
No, and you know, I think that a lot of people are like, oh, you know, January's a dead month. Might as well, you know, we've got this section marked out as our seasonal stuff. And so if there's nothing in January, then we might as well start filling it with February stuff. And what's in February? Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, that and Black History Month, but nobody cares about that.
Right.
Heart.
That's right.
So, yeah, that's you know, sort of a good little way to wrap out our Christmas year. I guess we can move on into what we've been watching. And last week, Henry, you were going to go and see No Way Home. We still haven't seen it yet. Don't worry about spoiling things for us. We don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you want to include spoilers, you know, you can just give the listeners a little shout. But what'd you think?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to we got there kind of late and we got to sit in the very front row. That was a lot of fun. But I mean, I like Marvel I've talked on the show plenty about it, and I was really skeptical about bringing everybody back. Like it's just kind of, you know, regurgitating, you know, just enough of that. And so I was a little worried going in. Overall, I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would. And I thought that the bringing back of the past Spider-Mans and the villains, which I don't think that's a spoiler, but bringing all that back was actually done a lot better than I thought. And there was some very like serious moments with it, but also there was some self-awareness to like, this is ridiculous. And so actually I enjoyed it. And I think that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire and having Tom Holland there as well was actually pretty awesome, and it was done well. And then for the most part, the villains were good. There are a few kind of some lulls in the middle. It's pretty long. Like I would take off maybe at least 15 or 20 minutes. It's like 2.5 hours. And so overall, I think I still enjoy Far From Home is the second one, I believe, with Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah, I still enjoy that one a little bit more. This would probably be second, and then Homecoming would be about the same in third. Yeah, it's just it was much better than I thought it would be. I think that I can see why people love it. I don't really love the idea of why people love it, because again, it's just bringing back previous content. But for what it is, it was pretty competent.
Okay.
So yeah, I think y'all will enjoy it.
Yeah, I honestly don't think that I'll necessarily hate it. And I don't dislike the concept of bringing in these alternate versions of Peter. Honestly, the thing that I have hated the most from it is this discourse of people being like, now we need to do Raimi's Spider-Man 4. Now we need to finish out the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy. Fuck it, and fuck that idea. It's the worst idea possible. Move forward. Move on.
Yeah.
Make different things. It's over. Y'all all sound like Jack from Lost. Kate, we have to go back to the island. Shut up.
Yeah.
No, they can't. They refuse. If they stay in 2002 long enough, then maybe they can go back to it.
Yeah.
No, you're right. And so for me, like, I've hated that kind of like restore the Snyderverse dialogue that's now infecting this. And like, I've even seen on Twitter, Guillermo went and shared his idea on what his Pacific Rim 2 sequel was going to be. And I've now seen people being like, they need to let him go and redo Pacific Rim 2. And I'm like, no, if anything, let him finish out Hellboy. First off, if we're going to do anything, let him finish Hellboy.
Yeah.
Second of all, in general, move on. He moved on. You should too. He made it.
Yeah, like I'd said, and one last thing about the movie, I could have used a little less Doctor Strange in the movie. He was in it more than I thought he would be, or at least more so in the first half. Because really, nothing. I like Benedict Cumberbatch and I like the concept of the character, but whenever he would come on screen, it would be these like exposition dumps of like the most absurd dialogue you could ever imagine. Like the magic sphere is connecting with the, this verse and that verse, and like it just completely. That's one of the reasons why the Tobey Maguire ones in particular will always kind of be above these, because these movies are obliged to feed into the rest of the universe, whereas those don't, because obviously it's just a straight trilogy. And this movie or this series has to constantly call back to these other parts of the MCU, and it's just not interesting, and it's pretty goofy at times. And so, could have used a little bit less of him, but Willem Dafoe was awesome. Alfred Molina was great. Really, everybody who were the villains once again was quite good. And Marissa Tomei was excellent. And I think this is probably Tom Holland's best performance as Spider-Man. But maybe that's because they just gave him more to do, but I think this is his best.
Okay. I think part of the reason that Strange feels a little bit odd is that this was originally supposed to take place after his movie. And so Multiverse of Madness, I think, was going to set up some of this like thinning of space and time. But since then, because of pandemic issues and stuff like that, they ended up pushing Strange so far back, they then ended up having to rewrite some of the reasoning for why this was happening. And so I think that's possibly also why he's coming in and doing such awkward exposition dumps, is because they're having to go back and fix the fact that the movie's order got switched entirely.
Sure. And then, last thing about the movie, Tobey Maguire is the greatest. Just was awesome.
He'll always be the best.
Yeah. What else? Have you all watched anything recently?
Yeah, so since our last recording, we did watch The Holiday and White Christmas. Both are great. We also watched, for the first time for me, it's one of Lauren's favorites. We watched Spirited Away. Lovely. Delightful movie, absolutely charming. I was very smitten with it for it being 2 hours, plus. It moves incredibly well. The pacing of it is super dynamic. The characters are very engaging. The world is super interesting. My first Miyazaki movie, I've only seen 2. That's my film confession right now. My first one was Howl's Moving Castle, and I really liked that one a lot. But honestly, I prefer Spirited Away, I think.
No, I'd say that I feel that as well. I find that like now, having rewatched Spirited Away, I haven't seen this movie in quite some time. Howl's Moving Castle kind of, I feel like it's almost trying to mimic a lot of these emotional beats and a lot of character types for me, and I feel like they just they're a lot better in Spirited Away than in House, because it is also kind of like a similar story of it, like at the crux of it, it's like a love story.
Mhm.
And I think that they're the same kind of characters. You know, it's like a young girl, naive, thrown into a magical world, and then she ends up falling in love with a young man who lives in the magical world and has magical abilities. And they're kind of, you know, copy and paste almost. So I just think that they're done better in Spirited Away, especially with the world itself. And I always just really enjoy the characters. And honestly, Miyazaki has just like a beautiful way of not only like building the world, but also like presenting that world to you visually. I find just so fascinating, and it's just breathtaking when you get to like have all of those wide sweeping shots of like the exteriors and of nature. And it's just really interesting, not only just with the characters themselves, but also just like the whole picture feels like a work of art.
Mhm.
No, for sure. Beyond that, last night we watched The Last Action Hero, which was a first time for both of us. Such a blast, a really
Yeah.
fun movie. Again, not perfect. I think that there are ways that, especially the finale, could have delivered better on what the premise promises. But I think overall it's really enjoyable. Have you
Agreed.
seen Last Action Hero?
I have. It's been a hot minute, but yes, I have.
Okay.
You know, I found this movie to be a little bit like where we are now in cinema and the making of movies. It was kind of like this, you know, it's this kid who loves movies so much that he's willing to give up his own life in the real world in order to live in a fantasy world with fake characters where he can basically predict every little move that they do. And I feel like that's exactly where we are with movies. Everybody's like, yeah, I want to know exactly
I
what's going
want
to
the
happen.
comfort. My life is too chaotic. I want the
Yeah.
comfort.
Yeah, I don't want to be surprised anymore. I want to be able to know that like he's gonna shoot that guy and jump out of that window and survive, and like a bullet wound is just a flesh wound in this world and nobody dies, you know. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting, especially considering, you know, this movie is from 1993, and it feels like we're just, you know, in this cycle of constantly redoing the same kind of, you know, blah.
Yeah.
as they're talking about, as they're satirizing in this movie is I feel like where we are now, you know, with this whole like bring it back, let's do it again one more time, or let's, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle, but with cinema.
Hmm.
It's really interesting, and I honestly really enjoyed how on the nose it is, but also where it finds its own heart. And I do agree that it doesn't land as well all of the time, but I think that Arnold is really funny in a way that like you don't get to see too often, is like Arnold being like actually like amusing and not just muscle and accent.
Yeah, I don't know where Arnold of the 90s went, but I miss him.
He got into politics.
Yeah. Beyond that, the only other thing that we've seen since we last recorded is Matrix Resurrections. But, dear listener, you don't get to hear what we thought of that this episode. You're going to have to come back next week if you want to know what we thought, because we're going to be doing Matrix Resurrections and Free Guy.
Cruel.
You know, I'm pulling an MCU. We're teasing them for the next one.
Yeah. No, I've been wanting to watch that myself. So yeah, I'll be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, I haven't seen Free Guy either, but
Okay, it's all right.
that's what I heard.
But no, I think we'll probably have pretty similar opinions on Free Guy. Matrix is probably a little bit more of a flip of the coin. So I'll be curious to know what you think when you see it.
But honestly, isn't that just the Matrix in general? You know, it's constantly having people of differing opinions, left, right, and center, because, you know, it's too aware of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Well, I think that's just about all that we have time for. Henry, you know, we're not quite sure when you'll join us again. Would you like to say anything to the listeners? Any final messages before we head into 2022?
Good luck. I don't know. I mean, I appreciate, it's been nice to be back on. And, when we recorded last week, I was kind of just going through the episodes over the years. And I think that it is kind of cool now that we've been going for, I think, 4.5 years now. And there really is at this point, like, a history to the show. And it is kind of cool to, like, go back and hear all the different guests that we've had on, the different hosts, and, like, not each year, but each kind of stage has its own personality to it, and try different things. And so I think it is really cool, if not saying you have to start at the very beginning, but, like, it is cool to dance around a little bit and just hear some past experiences, past hosts, and just see how the show has evolved over the years. And I really, whether you're a new listener now or you've been listening for a while, I do really appreciate everybody who's been supporting it. That's been awesome. And I'm hoping to be back on when I can. January, I'm kind of going to be in, like, kind of blackout mode, but then, and after that, I should have a fairly regular schedule. So I might quite possibly be able to come on every so often, maybe on weekends or something like that. But yeah, it's just, and Paul, again, and to you, Lauren, as well, it's been awesome to see what y'all have done with the show and just enjoy me not being on it. And so I wish everybody the best with the new year. Just stay safe and think before you act. So.
Very fair.
Yeah.
Dear, anything you would like to say to the listeners before we move into 2022?
Sure. This time of year can be hard. You're starting a new year, and there's always this, like, weird, oh gosh, I got to reinvent myself. What have I done with this year? Yada, yada, yada. Just remember that you're still here, and that's an achievement in itself. And it's not about what you do, but it's, it's who you are. You can do things without even realizing it. It's not necessarily all of the achievements necessarily. It's not the Facebook posts or the Instagrammable lifestyle. You're enough on your own, and you make more of an impact than you realize. So take that into the new year, and yeah, Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Said, love.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Yeah, that's all I got.
Well, listeners, 2021 was something. I began this year coming on as a little bit of a guest host, and then I became the regular co-host, and now I've been hosting for a while. Thank you all for listening. It's been quite a journey, and I thank Henry for putting his faith in me, and I thank you all for continuing to come, new and old. 2022, promises everything that every year promises. Struggle and triumph, and that sounds a little bit bleak, but that's the human condition, right? Work and success and hardship. But hopefully, you have people in your corner, and if you don't, hell, the film buds will be. And
Sure.
We're planning to grow and change and do some different stuff in the new year. But it'll always ultimately be about friendship and film, and how film can bring us together, even if we have differing opinions. So please keep listening. We're going to try and always do our best to make a show that's worth listening to, that you guys like listening to. We'll be adding in some different stuff, changing a few things. But it's going to be a good time. And we hope that you stick with us for the journey. And we hope that you all have a happy new year.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
no, you got it.
Okay. I was also going to say, if you would like to help us with some of our journey, by March is when you can go and try and become Rotten Tomatoes certified. And so if you haven't already, go and give us a review. We meet all of the criteria but one, and it's the number of reviews that keep us at a 4-star rating. So go and give us a review. Tell your friends to give us a listen and give us a review. But if you would like to go and try and give us some help, go and give us a review, and help us grow and tell people about us. You can find us at the Film Buds on Instagram and the Film Buds podcast on Twitter. We're on Facebook. And as always, we haven't had a listener question in a while, but as always, you can email us at thefilmbudspodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. Paul, I was going to say, also, along with getting a review, which I very much encourage, if you want to laugh, you can go through some of the Film Buds reviews on iTunes, and there have been some passionate people on there for better or worse. So if you want to laugh, you can go through
absolutely.
the years. So
actually, we did have a semi-recent review. Let me go and pull that up real quick. It was very eloquent. I have to share it.
Okay.
It was from October 22nd from Jules Guam 671. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. Quality podcast.
Nice. That's probably Sky Tilly. He goes 10 out of 10. He always has to use 10-star ratings.
Sky, you devious dog, using a pseudonym.
Sneaky dog.
But no, thank you, Henry, for coming on, for everything you've done, for letting me join you on this wonderful journey, and
Sure.
Thank you, dear, for joining me.
Hey, I don't have anything else to do, so might as well record what we already talk about.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, I guess we'll see y'all next week. Next month is going to be movies that we missed in 2021. We actually already posted what our themes are going to be for the next 3 months over on Twitter and Instagram. So go ahead and give that a look, and we look forward to seeing y'all in the new year. Bye.
Bye.
So long.